Good afternoon, everyone. Andy Jacob here with the DotCom Magazine Entrepreneur Spotlight Show. And today's guest I'm very excited to have on, Mr. Evan Nierman, is the CEO and founder of Red Banyan. And you may have seen Evan on the TED Talk that he has given, which is really remarkable. And we definitely recommend you look that TED Talk up because there's a lot to learn there. And what Evan and Red Banyan specialize in, they're a PR company that specializes in crisis management. And in today's day and age, nothing's more important for many companies with regard to what Evan and Red Banyan can offer. So Evan, thank you so much for being on the show today.
Yeah, thanks. It's so great to be here, and I appreciate you having me.
Thank you. So let's pull the lens back a little bit, Evan, just a bit, and tell us about Red Banyan. And you've become such a successful company. Let's kind of pull the lens back to 30,000 feet and tell our viewers exactly what you do over there.
Yeah, well, there are two main types of clients that I tell people we work with. Those who want to get in the press and those who need to get out and get out right now. So that kind of speaks to the two divisions within the company, one being strategic communications and PR. And by that, I mean, how can we as communicators assist an organization or an individual with accomplishing their strategic objectives using communications? And then on the other side of the business is our crisis management services. And the crisis team really springs into action immediately to help good people and good organizations who find themselves in complicated, complex, or negative situations where they're being smeared online, they're being attacked by the press, there's been something negative that's happened in the business, and we help guide them through that tumultuous time so that they can put the crisis in the rearview mirror and move on with their lives.
That's awesome. And you have some amazing case studies on your website, and obviously you're an expert in this particular very specialized field of crisis management. And let's take the two parts that you mentioned separately. There's people that contact Red Banyan that want to get into the press, and then there's people that contact you when they have a challenge, whether it's with their social media or online or something going on. So people that are contacting Red, do they contact you because they're just trying to get press for their startup or for their company, or they have a new announcement that needs to get some good collateral material about what they're doing? Is that sort of the way it works, Evan?
Yeah, it runs the gamut. There's a lot of different things that we do to help organizations. I mean, fundamentally, what we want to understand, and this is something that comes in the first conversation that I or someone else from my team has with the organization, is to understand, what are you looking to accomplish? And then if we know where we're trying to get to, we help them chart a course in order to get there. And every instance is different. So for some organizations, they need to get into the press. They need that validity of legitimate news sources turning to them, featuring them as an expert, taking their analysis. They want us pitching them for television, national, international, local, regional, industry specific. In some cases, it's really important for them to get their executives into speaking opportunities. Now in the age of COVID, sometimes that means, or it mostly means at this point, speaking online in Zoom or Skype or Google Meet situations. But before, and hopefully one day before too long, it will entail actually people speaking face-to-face in real life again. For some of our clients, they need to be positioned as experts and thought leaders. And so we'll work to ghost author op-eds for them and get those placed in publications. So it really runs the gamut. And some of the other organizations, you were mentioning startups, smaller companies that are trying to create a buzz around what they're doing, getting people to know who they are and what they do is often the hardest thing, because there's so much noise all around us every day. We are just literally bombarded by messages from the moment we wake up till the moment we go to sleep at night. And so we try to help them find ways to break through the clutter, to get their message out there so that they can attract investors, prospects, clients, potential people to hire, business partners, etc. So when people are contacting Red Banyan and looking for the general PR services, that's what they're looking to do. They want to tell their story. They want to tell it to those who matter the most, and they want to tell it quickly in the right way. And that's our job, is to help them do that.
See, I think that's wonderful. And that's what Red Banyan really has become known for, is if I want to get some PR, it's not simply as picking up the phone and calling Evan and saying, hey, I want some PR. Evan and his team do a deep dive. And what they do is they help you craft your story. And that's very important, because Evan knows sort of what pushes the buttons around the world with regard to what people want to hear and the way in which you want to portray yourself online. Is that sort of a high level of what you do at Red Banyan?
Yeah, absolutely. And just to be clear, I've got a great team around me. So it's not just me. And one of the secrets has been bringing onto my team lots of former journalists, because no one knows how journalists think, react, understand, look at stories better than someone who's been there, done that. So if you look through the roster of who are some of our senior team members, you're going to find former print reporters with postings overseas focused on financial markets and M&A. You're going to find former TV producers and on-air reporters. So again, as you mentioned, Andy, people often think they've got something that's a story, but they have a fundamental misunderstanding about what actually is newsworthy. So we try to help them dissuade them if they're pursuing something that isn't likely to be a story, and help them get creative about how they can make a story, how they can take the good things that are going on in their company and actually share them and do it in a way that's going to attract the attention of the press, as opposed to what happens to 99.9% of pitches. They hit the inbox, the person clicks delete, game over.
Game over. But with Red Banyan, it's game started, right?
It's game on.
Game on. I love it. Okay, that's great. So obviously your success speaks for itself. And what we want to talk about now, because it's on everybody's mind, especially in this day and age, and with society changing every single day, it seems like, with the cancel culture and this and that, and with the online, social media and things happening, and people getting canceled out, and people having crises, and then there's crises throughout the world. One of your expertise at Red Banyan is the crisis management component. So this is an area where Evan really shines, and people call him when they really have a crisis or a problem with their company or their personal brand. So let's talk a little bit about that, Evan, because that was one of the things that I was very excited about having you on the show today, because so many people are so concerned about this type of a thing that's happening in the world today. So let's talk high level about how Red Banyan helps these companies with crisis management.
Sure. Well, as you pointed out, you're on the money. Now is a time in history that is unique. And there has never been a time where you're seeing more crises happening in a short time period and with devastating consequences. And, I'll walk you in answer to this topic. I'll tell you a funny story. When I started Red Banyan 9 years ago, we were meant to be a crisis PR firm, chiefly, in day one. I'd worked in crisis PR, both in-house as well as for an entrepreneurial agency before. I'd worked in politics many years and advocacy in Washington, D.C. When I had my idea, I'm going to start this business, we are going to focus on crisis PR. We are a crisis PR firm. And what I found was people loved to talk to me. And I would go to events around town. I'd meet people at dinner, and we would have these conversations, and everyone wanted to know, tell me a story, give me a war story, give me an example of what you do. And at the end of every single conversation, it ended pretty much the same way. They would shake my hand and say, wow, I really enjoyed meeting you. What you do is fascinating. I hope I never have to call you. And I'm kind of a slow learner, I guess, because it took me hearing that several dozen times before it kind of clicked in my head. And I said, wait a minute. On the one hand, I'm doing something right because people are interested in what we're doing. But on the flip side, nobody wants to call us. Hence, it's going to be hard for us to generate business. And at the end of the day, if you don't have clients, you don't have a business. You don't have a business, you don't have jobs. It's a vicious cycle. So I pivoted and I kept one foot in the crisis world. And I said, okay, well, we're going to continue to maintain this unique niche expertise because it's very hard to find good crisis PR firms. Every agency in America claims to do crisis PR. Very few have actually done it. So we kept one foot in the crisis world. And then we also said, well, you know what? We're gonna do what you and I were describing in our earlier exchange, talking about how to use positive PR, not just extricating people from bad situations, but putting them into the media, putting them out there. And by the way, target audiences you need to reach, sometimes they're media folks, and sometimes they're sitting right next to you and you don't even think about them. So it could be internal audiences, it could be coworkers, it could be other people in the community. So I pivoted and went from a crisis firm that was basically focused on crisis to a firm that had expertise in crisis PR, but was a conventional PR firm, strategic communications. Well, what we found just in the last 4 months, the number of incidents that have happened in the United States have swung the pendulum on our firm back again. And while we continue to maintain the clients who want to get in the press and want to utilize us in order to accomplish their goals, our phones are ringing off the hook because there is so much going on and there are so many threats, and danger lurks behind every corner in this modern media-driven society.
See, that makes a lot of sense. And for the entrepreneurs watching this show, there's something to learn here as well, because Evan was able to do a nice pivot based on hearing responses from potential customers out and about. And when he would tell people about the crisis management component, people would say to him, boy, I hope I never call you. So he kind of did a small pivot, went into the sort of regular PR program, but then kept his foot dangled into the crisis management, knowing that that's a need and he had an expertise. And here we are in 2020 and in later in the year after COVID, and with a lot of social situations going on where companies are being bombarded by different factions and different people that want to be heard, that sometimes these companies need this type of crisis management. So if I'm a company, Evan, and I'm watching this show, and obviously maybe I'm feeling some heat from something or somewhere, whether it's online or social, and obviously they're going to want to call you and talk to you. But for those people that don't really understand what crisis management is all about, how do you handle the process for these companies?
Mm-hmm. How do we handle the process for them?
Yeah, like how do you handle when someone calls you and says, hey, Evan, I'm having a problem. I've got some people that are bashing me online and bashing me on social, and I just don't know how to respond. Is there a process you take them through to teach them how to be a great CEO in these very, very challenging times?
Yeah, it's a great question, and it's something everyone really needs to know, because I spent years running around preaching this gospel that no one wanted to hear, which is crises are inevitable. It's going to happen to every company, every organization, every individual at some point. And people thought I was a little bit of a Chicken Little, sky is falling. Why is he such an alarmist? Well, in 2020, between COVID, pandemic, global pandemic, a lot of increasing friction on the political front, protests in the street related to racial inequality and justice. It's a perfect storm of crises. Throw in, for good measure, some natural disasters and this concept that you introduced called cancel culture. And these are definitely scary times. So look, when our phone rings, when I'm talking to someone, and I'll give you a prime example. I got a call yesterday from someone who was in hiding, literally in hiding, because a mob of angry people were exercised about a controversy that's swirling online. And this individual is receiving death threats and was fearing for the life of her family and herself, and was in a safe house. So the main thing that we do, and our role, is to uncover the truth. Because at the end of the day, we view our fundamental reason for existing is to empower our clients to fight for the truth. And we do that through an approach which I describe as pressing the truth. And the number one thing that you have to do when you're in crisis is understand exactly what you're facing. It's information gathering. So the first thing that I'm doing when I'm in a conversation with someone who reaches out is get them, let them know first and foremost, we're having a private conversation. They're in a safe place. Everything is confidential. And then let's understand what's going on. Because if we don't understand the context, we don't understand the details, my team and I can't go out and be a skilled advocate for this person if we don't understand the facts. And knowledge and information is power. So step one is really to gather the information, and then we do our own deep dive. We look to see online what's being said. We're active in checking out on social media. We want to know if reporters are digging into this story, because a lot of people have this misconception that the press is dead, that media no longer exists, and that it doesn't matter just because someone can choose where they consume their media. They like Fox, they like MSNBC, they like to read the Wall Street Journal, they read the New York Times on their iPad. Yes, it's segmented and people can self-select. However, because of the interconnectedness of all forms of communication, real media does still matter, because that content and that story, once it gets out there, it's disseminated. And it's disseminated in a way that it wasn't even 5 or 10 years ago. And so once you've gathered the information, once you've understood the facts, we need to know, are there reporters who are working on this story right now? Are there fires that are burning that need to be put out? So it's really like a triage situation. We'll deal with the triage, and then once we've done that, instantly what we've got to be able to do is process lots of pieces of information. And you gain a way of doing this through experience, years of experience, and being able to tell the person, okay, we've got a plan. These are the components to the plan. We're going to execute against that plan, and we got to be disciplined and we got to be calm. And I think at the end of the day, it's funny. Some of my colleagues talk about, I'll check in with them and say, how are we doing with this client? How are we doing with that? And we know we've done our job when we've gotten to a point where the answer I get is, yeah, we're in pretty good shape. There's no stories on the way right now. It's more of a therapy session. And if we're keeping that person calm and we're keeping them focused, and for CEOs, it's a really hard era to be a CEO, because there's so much scrutiny. Everyone's got an opinion and everyone has a platform thanks to social media. So for CEOs who are out there who are watching, you have to be really, really careful, but you also want to surround yourself with people who know and understand how to deal with crisis, because as you pointed out, Andy, it's a unique niche. And if you're having a heart attack or you need a heart operation, you don't go to see a general practitioner, you go to see a cardiologist or a cardiac surgeon. And so in the realm of PR, we are specialists, and that's where people really, once they work with us, we guide them through it. We help them stay calm, stay focused. And the biggest thing that people have to also avoid is making things worse. And when you're in a high pressure situation and in a crisis, it's very easy to make a misstep, and then you just exacerbate your pain.
Wow. And people that watch the show, they know that we always say that specialists win and generalists lose. And this is a perfect example of that, with Evan, with his background and experience being in Washington and doing, international, global, impactful crisis management and PR. He specializes in this. Let's talk about the emotional component, because I'm hearing you say that, when someone calls you, they need some help in terms of a process to fix their crisis. But I would imagine in your field, it's very important also to understand the psychology, not only of your customer, but the psychology of, let's say, the people online or the people on Twitter that are kind of going crazy against the company. So I would imagine you have to put one foot in the process and one foot as being almost a psychological helper, if you will. So how do you manage that, handling so many customers that have psychological pain?
Having a high EQ is often just as important as having a high IQ. And so, one of the things that is really important, and this is what makes it hard for us also to hire, is because I only want to bring the best of the best onto my team. And what's difficult is sometimes you'll get someone who's a really good operator and they've got really good technical skills and they don't have great people skills. So they're not a great communicator. Maybe they're a great writer, but they struggle when they have to get face to face with someone or pick up a phone, which, note to all of the people under 30 who are watching right now, the phone does more than just text, and there are still people out there who want to talk to you on it. So you have to treat it as a device that isn't just a texting machine. And, to your point, you have to be able to build rapport with the client quickly by being sensitive and being empathetic and understanding, putting yourself in their shoes, in their situation, and imagining what it's like. Because keep in mind, when we're talking to people who are in a crisis, they're at some of their most vulnerable moments of their lives. I've had CEOs in their office with me with the door closed, weeping, head on the desk, sobbing, afraid that if word gets out that they could potentially lose a spouse, lose the business, lose their job, lose their respect of their friends and their colleagues. So we deal with weighty, heavy matters. And for that, you've got to really be sensitive and you've got to respect the fact that there's a human element to it. At the same time, those same skills, I think, are really important when you're talking with reporters. You got to be able to explain and help the reporter understand the viewpoint of our client. And then similarly, as you pointed out, discussions take place online. You go on Twitter, you want to see take the pulse of the nation, go on Facebook, go on Instagram, go on these platforms and see TikTok and understand what people are talking about and what they're debating. So you've really got to be in tune with what's going on, and you've got to be able to not see it through your narrow set of blinders, but to look at it from a different perspective and to think also of how the person on the receiving end may be, receiving the information that you want to put out. Because everyone thinks that they're really great well, we had a great conversation, said the guy who never stopped talking and never listened. So the other, a skill that's really essential, it's ironic because I'm sitting here talking so much with you, is listening and being a good listener.
You are, and obviously you have to be a great listener. So Evan, people that watch the show, they know that I'm a believer in the 80-20 theory, that typically if you look at a problem or look at a situation, the majority of 80% of the problem or the situation can be compartmentalized in a few things. So 80% of your business, for example, is probably made up of a certain group of crises that you're seeing. So at a high level, could you tell us maybe the top 2 or 3 crises that you're dealing with from management in today's world?
Yeah, I'm a believer in the 80-20 rule also, and you see it in so many different aspects of business. It's uncanny, really. Right now, what we're seeing is a huge spike in people who are caught on video doing or saying things that they wish they could do over again. And that's a big part of what's driving cancel culture, is because there's this visual and there's a person, and sometimes that person's not having his or her best day, and they do or say something that they then regret. That's one. 2 is someone becomes a target of a lie or a rumor and misinformation. And then there's this sort of sweeping wave that's gathering steam, and it's rolling towards the shore, and the person feels powerless to stop it and is out there floundering in the ocean, unable to counter this false negative information that's out there. Both of those things are happening all the time right now. And cancel culture sort of straddles the two. And cancel culture, I'd put in its own category, but we're seeing so much of that right now. Is we're at a moment in time where people want to be activists, and they want to take action, and they want to feel empowered, they want to feel heard. And in many cases, that's completely legitimate, and it's for good social outcomes. In other cases, they gather a fragmented piece of information that they get online. They assume that it's true, they extrapolate, and then they become a crusader for justice. And so we're finding ourselves in a position of really helping organizations. And it happens to nonprofits, it happens to for-profits, privately held businesses, publicly traded, it doesn't matter. Is a group of people decides, we got religion, we're good, they're bad, we're going to take them down. And when that happens, then you have to know how to respond in a way that doesn't make you actually look even, that you don't confirm their worst suspicions about you, but you instead flip the narrative and show the softer side and the caring side.
So this is a very delicate balance that you're mentioning, and that's why someone trying to handle this on their own really is making a very big error and a giant mistake potentially for their company, because entrepreneurs sometimes think that they can handle things on their own and can handle problems and crises on their own. And the real bottom line here is that this is such a sensitive sort of situation that these people find themselves in, that you need to bring in someone that not only has that emotional understanding of what's making the waves move, but also has the technical know-how to get the right message out that's crafted properly for the CEOs and the management of the management team. So Evan, if we're thinking about the first example that you gave, which was the video where somebody's caught on video and they said something that they regret, you said maybe they're having a bad day. You know, we know that video speaks louder than words. As a matter of fact, online video gets shared online 1,200% more than just a story or text at this point in time. So someone watching the show is going to ask the question, and I'm asking the question, how do you deal with someone that says something abhorrent on video because they're having a bad day? Like, what's the process there? It almost seems that would be impossible for someone other than, let's say, Red Banyan or an expert to extricate the video from.
It's not impossible, but it's challenging. And if
Right.
the person's on video doing or saying something regretful, then it becomes that much harder. So I don't want to downplay it and say, no, there's no problem we can't fix. Sometimes there are certain things and certain actions that people take where there is no coming back. It's the exception. It's not the rule. That tends to also be very high profile individuals who live in the public eye and they betray the public's trust. So in situations like that, think Lance Armstrong, Bill Cosby, Matt Lauer, high profile people that people have an affinity towards and respect and like, and then they discover this person is not who I thought he was or she was. So in those situations, it's very, very difficult. For the entrepreneur who's out there who's faced with this, I think it's the 80-20 rule. 80% of us entrepreneurs definitely believe that we can fix it. After all, we fix things and we're solution finders, and we find a way. When the going gets tough, we get moving, we get excited by the challenge, and we move forward. The issue when you're in a crisis is you're not thinking rationally, you're emotionally invested, and it's very hard to make a decision in that moment that could potentially impact the future of your business because you're too close to it. And for that reason, that's why a lot of lawyers, they may have the technical expertise, but it's not advisable for them to represent themselves. So the benefit of bringing someone in from the outside is you get an outside perspective and you start to see patterns and you learn through doing. On-the-job training is the only way to get good at crisis management. And you start learning what works and what doesn't work. And even though the situations are always slightly different, there's certain commonalities and threads that run through everything. And you're able to draw upon techniques that you've used in the past that have been effective and do it for the new client. And, the other thing I'll just mention is I think is a differentiator between some of the firms that are out there and some of the big agencies is when you work with a smaller public relations firm, especially a specialized crisis firm, we're also entrepreneurs and we understand business from a small business perspective, not necessarily someone who's been a part of a machine where it's an international conglomerate with thousands or tens of thousands of employees and has a very corporate, very traditional. The way that we look at problems is much more, sometimes we're not for everyone. Sometimes our approach is a little too aggressive, a little too in your face for everyone, but it definitely resonates with entrepreneurs and growing businesses, which is why a lot of our clients tend to be companies that are, they've either made it and they're excelling in their field and they're an industry leader, or they're almost there and they're on their way to that. And we enjoy working with organizations like that. Who wants to do the same old thing? And when you get into a crisis situation with a very, and I don't mean politically conservative, I mean just a conservative organization that's moving slowly and not willing to do what it needs to do to be dynamic, it's harder to move the needle.
No, that makes a lot of sense, Evan. So something that comes to mind, a question that comes to mind hearing you talk, and I'm not 100% sure that there even is an answer, but when someone comes to you and they're a CEO and they've got a problem, is it generally better for that CEO to take ownership themselves and address the public, or is it better for like a third party person or someone else in the organization or even another company to address the situation on behalf of the CEO?
It's a great question. And the answer depends completely on the circumstances. So if it's a problem, I'll take an example of let's say there's a construction company. I'm just making this stuff up. There's a construction company and there's an accident on site. Someone gets injured or, God forbid, killed. And, the owner of the business, there's something to be said by that individual stepping forward saying, look, we're going to do an investigation. We're going to get to the bottom of what happened here. We're thinking of the family of the person who was injured. And there's something about seeing that chief executive officer, the face of the company, roll up her sleeves and really take ownership and be accountable. And so in a lot of cases, it is absolutely advisable for the CEO to be the front person. In other cases, it really doesn't make sense, especially if you're dealing with a situation where, it's a cancel culture type of deal where someone's locked on to something relatively minor or small, where you could conceivably say, well, look, it's a big company and the CEO, it's impossible for the CEO to be involved on a day-to-day basis with every single aspect of the business. In that case, you may be better off having someone who does have expertise in a certain area within the business speaking either to reporters or to the public, et cetera. So imagine you've got a company that, for instance, I'm just making this one up too, but this happens all the time, a data breach. So you could have the CEO talking about the data breach, but at the end of the day, he or she is probably not going to have the real knowledge of the systems and as much as your chief technology officer or your COO. So in that case, it may make sense to have someone else from the C-suite pulled in to be the face of the company. And in other cases, guess what? You don't want the scandal or the situation to be attached to anyone. And it's better to just be kind of a nameless, faceless thing. You've got a statement from the company or you've got someone on social media just posting from behind a keyboard. And knowing which is the right thing is a delicate balance. And it's like what some people have said with pornography. You know it when you see it.
Right. That makes a lot of sense. So that leads me to my follow-up question, Evan. So are there times when people might call you for your expertise over at Red Banyan, and the best course of action, in your opinion, sometimes is just to do nothing? I'm just curious if that ever happens.
It does happen sometimes. It's rare, but guess what? Doing nothing or saying nothing, people may perceive that the company is doing nothing or saying nothing. But let's say you're a host, a media host. Your name's, say, Andy J. We'll keep it very general so that, Andy J, just pulled from the sky. There's an allegation against Andy, and it's totally without merit. It's silly. It's accusing him of something that he didn't do. Well, he may be not engaging publicly to address it because it's just not worth it. He's not going to even dignify it with a response. At the same time, this fictional Andy J character may be doing things, and we may be advising him behind the scenes to do things. So, Andy, let's talk about who your number one customers are. Let's talk about who your target audiences are. How are they likely to react? Do we think they know about these allegations? If they do, then perhaps we want to preempt it and we want to go to them and say, hey, I just want to let you know, you might be hearing about this thing. I want you to know and understand the facts. So even when a company appears to be doing nothing, they may in fact be doing something behind the scenes. You may just have people like me whispering in the CEO's ear that publicly they need to not do anything, but they need to be taking action behind the scenes.
And that's that delicate balance as to why entrepreneurs faced with these types of situations should call Evan to use his expertise, because you want to use a specialist. So when we think about Red Banyan and we think about Evan, some people think about the TED Talk that you gave. And Evan is an expert in what he does, but he definitely is very, very interested and has a passion about sort of the danger of what can happen to people by playing the online game incorrectly. By being online can cause some dangers and cause some problems. So what I'd like to do here to end the interview, Evan, if you don't mind, is look into the camera, and for the people watching, that maybe are just taking for granted that being online is just like, it's not a danger zone. It's sort of like just this fun thing that we communicate with. Let them know from your perspective how dangerous being online can be if you do the wrong thing. And that might be a nice way to kind of help some people who are watching the show today.
Absolutely. Well, look, it's an important topic. And as the father of two young kids who have their own devices now, I'm reminded on a daily basis how important it is to exercise caution with being online. And as you pointed out, that the topic is one that I addressed in a talk called "How We Risk Our Lives Online." And I have a second TED Talk, which I hope you'll also check out, called "Never Tell the Truth." But I'll close with the concepts from those, which is, let's start with the online piece. If you do these two things, you will manage to not have a social media meltdown, and you will not ever need to call me. And that's what I actually hope for you, is that you won't need to. And that is if you share with care and you post with purpose. Think before you hit post. Consider what you're sharing. Is it really something that you want out there? Is it too revealing? Is there too much personal information? And then with the posting with purpose, what are you hoping to accomplish by saying what you're about to say? And if you just pause and you share with care and you post with purpose, you will avoid 99.9% of online problems. And the last concept that I'll leave with, which is really the theme of the other talk that I was able to give last year on the campus of Oracle, was in this day and age, it's not enough to just simply tell the truth. You have to press the truth. Telling the truth and hoping that one day the truth will come out, it doesn't work anymore. And you used to be able to do nothing. And you used to be able to choose that as a default. Now you got to get in the fight. You got to learn what people are saying about you, about your organization, and you've got to be willing to engage. Because if you don't tell your story, no one's going to tell it.
That is absolutely awesome. I'm going to watch the second TED Talk. I can't wait to watch it. And I'll watch it today, as a matter of fact. So, Evan, thank you so much. It's been tough to get you on the show because you're such a busy person, and I've tried to get you scheduled for a while here, and it's more than what I thought it would be talking to you based on your reputation and based on what people know about Red Banyan and the great work you do. So thank you so much for coming on the show today. I really appreciate it. And of course, Evan, we want to let people know how to get a hold of you, if they need your service.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, you can find us online, obviously, redbanyan.com. We're also active on Facebook, Twitter. We're on YouTube. You can reach out to us. You can send us a note, info@redbanyan.com. We review every email that comes in, and we like hearing from folks out there. Always happy to help and to share the information that people really need, but that they don't get unless they do things like watch Andy's show.
Evan, that's awesome. Thank you so much for being on the show today.
Thank you so much for having me. I really enjoyed our discussion.